You've probably seen public adjusters knocking on people's doors after a storm. Or maybe you've seen their advertisements promising bigger insurance claim payouts. Are they worth the 10, 15, 20% they're going to charge you to do that? It's actually not always a simple yes or no. Welcome back. I'm the insurance lady, and today we're going to talk about public adjusters. I'm going to explain what a public adjuster is, what they do, how they can save you money, how they can cost you money, and what your options are if you sign a contract and change your mind. So, what is a public adjuster? There's three types of adjusters in the insurance world. There's a staff adjuster, which is an adjuster that's employed by the insurance company. There's an independent adjuster who, while not employed by the insurance company, they still represent the insurance company in the claim process. And then there's the public adjuster, often referred to as a PA for short, and they're the adjuster that represents you in the insurance claim process. You might be wondering what the difference is between staff and independent because they both represent the carrier. And the difference is that staff adjusters are only allowed to work claims for the carrier that they're employed by, but independent are allowed to work claims for multiple carriers. And when it comes to public adjuster, they're retained by you and they're paid by you. So let's talk about what their fees are because that's really what everybody wants to know, right? Like, how much is this going to cost me? The fees, they can vary by state. I know, it's not really the answer you were looking for. But I do have some examples so that you can see across a few different states what that looks like. So if you're wondering what the PA could be charging you, definitely look into your state regulations to see what the limitations are. An example, in Texas, public adjusters are allowed to charge up to 10% of the claim settlement, and that's regardless of how they bill you, whether they're doing a flat fee, commission based, time and expense. That rate that they're charging you cannot exceed 10% of the claim settlement. Whereas in Florida, that threshold is increased to 20%, with the exception being that if it's a catastrophe or a cat claim, such as a hurricane, then they're only allowed to charge 10% on that claim if they're working the claim within a year of the date of loss. So if you've got a hurricane claim and you enlist a PA 18, 24 months after the date of loss, that's beyond the year threshold. And so they're now allowed to charge the 20%. So the 10% limitation is within a year of the date of loss on a cat claim. With North Carolina, there's no cap. Scary, I know. No, they usually charge between 10 and 15%, but just know that there is no cap. So if a public adjuster wants to charge 30%, they're allowed to. Obviously, you would have to agree to that. So it's whatever you guys come to an agreement on, but typically it's about 10, 15% is the current market value for that. The exception is with cat claims like Florida, they can only charge 10%. Now, the difference is that North Carolina doesn't have that year limitation. So PA can only charge 10% on a cat claim in North Carolina no matter when they're enlisted, whether it's day one, year two, year three, regardless, 10%. Now, there's some additional limitations that are set forth on PA payments, and some examples are the 72-hour rule. So, if an insurance company agrees to or makes a payment on a claim for a policy limits within 72 hours of the date of loss, then the PA is not allowed to charge a percentage. They can only charge a reasonable expense. So it'd be the reasonable amount of effort and time they put in to those long 72 hours to get that policy limit payment agreed to or paid. And the same goes for North Carolina. So they have that same 72-hour rule, but North Carolina also says that public adjusters are not allowed to take any upfront payments. So no deposits, no down payments, no retainers. PAs are not allowed to get any payment until the settlement is complete. And then Florida, they've got a unique way of doing it as well. So with Florida, if the policy limit is agreed to or paid by the insurance company within 14 days of the date of loss or 10 days of signing a contract with your PA, whichever is later, then the PA is only allowed to get 1% of the claim settlement. And the PA is not allowed to charge that 1% or any percentage for that matter on your policy deductible, which is good. And also, if the agreement is made or if the part of the claim is paid before your contract is signed, the PA doesn't get anything on that. So the PA is only allowed to recover a percentage based on whatever they've actually contributed to. Also, if you are looking to have your PA handle your ALE or your additional living expenses, which would be if you have to stay at a hotel while repairs are being made, that sort of a thing, then that would be a separate written agreement for Florida. So they have to have a separate written agreement for ALE for public adjusters. There's 4 states that don't even allow public adjusters, and those are Alabama, Arkansas, Alaska, and South Dakota. If you live in one of those states, you might be wondering, well, what about me? And if you're wondering what your options are for the claim process and your state doesn't allow a public adjuster, then the answer would be either you handle the claim yourself, or you hire an attorney to represent you, or you could have contractors prepare some bids for you or estimates. That way you can present that to your insurance company as a comparative. But it is important to know, contractors in any state are not allowed to negotiate the claim on your behalf because they're not public adjusters. So whether a public adjuster is allowed or not, either way, contractors are not allowed to negotiate a claim settlement for you. So the most that they're allowed to be active in the claims process is to prepare an estimate. Sometimes they'll come to an agreed scope with adjusters, and that's just them comparing estimates, saying, well, actually, we need to do this, no, we need to do this, that sort of thing. And so what you should do if you are going to hire a public adjuster is you should make sure that the contract specifically states what they're being hired for, which coverages, and you should also make sure that that contract has a break clause. See what that termination clause is. And that is very important. And I'll give you a couple examples why. So one example on why it's important to have it specifically state what the PA is actually doing is if you have a contractor and they're coming to an agreed scope with the adjuster on the repairs, and you want to get a PA involved because you don't want to have to deal with the contents or the ALE portion of the claim, because you'd rather have them submit all the documentation, compile the list, do all of that. That's totally understandable. But if you only want them to handle that portion of the claim, make sure it says that in the contract, because if the PA is primarily just handling the contents and the ALE, and your contractor reaches an agreed scope with the adjuster on the dwelling, and the contract doesn't specifically state that they're only being retained for certain coverages, then they're entitled to the percentage of their fee based on the dwelling as well. So you don't want to be missing out on that extra money just because the contract doesn't specifically say what you're enlisting the PA to help you with. And another example of why it's important to check the break clause is because there have been instances where public adjusters are often, in my experience with them on files, often they're out of state. So you can have a public adjuster from Florida trying to be your public adjuster on a Texas claim or North Carolina claim. And that usually is going to come with a lot of scheduling conflicts, and sometimes it can create delays, that sort of a thing. And there was one claim that we handled where the public adjuster was supposed to be submitting the ALE receipts on the insured's behalf, and they never did. And so the insured ended up having to finish the claim on their own and basically just sort all of that out. So they got all the documents, they resubmitted them, they had to handle it. When you have a contract with a PA, the insurance company has to list your PA on the payment check. So if you end up having to do all the work yourself, then you want to make sure that you're not having to pay the PA as well. And the only way to not have to pay the PA is, the only way for the insurance company to not include them on the check is if there's a termination of the agreement. So you need to know how you'd be able to terminate that and make sure that that is even an available option to you as well. So let's talk about what public adjusters actually do. And they can do several different things. A good public adjuster will probably inspect your damages, they'll measure your damages, prepare an estimate of repairs. They might also be reviewing your insurance policy to see what sort of additional coverages are afforded to you for this particular claim. They would be submitting documentation on your behalf to the adjuster to make sure they have all the supporting documents that they need to process the claim. They could be negotiating the claim for you. So if the adjuster comes with an initial offer, the PA could kind of go back and forth and try to negotiate a better settlement for you. If they feel like there's certain elements that were missed or overlooked, they could make sure that those are added. And they could also handle all the communications for you. So whenever you sign a contract with a public adjuster, the insurance company, the adjuster, they'll work directly with the PA, but it's different than whenever you hire an attorney. When you hire an attorney, legally, they're only allowed to contact the attorney. They cannot contact you anymore. But whenever you hire a PA, they're still allowed to contact you in certain instances. So if you enlist a PA and they're overbooked and they're not really responsive, they're not being cooperative, then the adjuster can reach out to you, and if they have certain questions or if they want to let, hey, your adjuster is not responding. So they still can touch base with you in certain things, and you'll still be CC'd on any letters that are sent to your PA. So you'll still get a copy. It's not a direct no contact. Whereas if you hire an attorney, that is more of a direct no contact. They can't contact you directly. Everything has to go through the attorney. And then also the public adjuster will attend inspections. So whether it's their site inspection or a joint inspection with the adjuster or the contractor or an expert on the claim, they'll attend those, and they'll also help you facilitate those inspections as well. So essentially, a PA is your advocate during the claims process. And so now that you kind of know what they do, we'll talk about when hiring a PA would make sense. And there's a few different scenarios where hiring a PA makes total sense, such as a large fire loss. Because with a large fire loss, you've got so many elements that go into that. You've got your personal property, you've got additional living expenses, hotels, having to eat out because you don't have access to your kitchen anymore. You've got the structural portion, mitigation, the tear out, the build back. There's a lot that goes into that. And these can be very time-consuming claims. And so that would be a great time to enlist a PA because they can really help you with all of that. And also they can help you make sure that there's no coverages that are overlooked, debris removal, that sort of a thing, code upgrades. So they, like I said earlier, they can review your insurance policy. And so on these complex or large claims, they can make sure that nothing is overlooked or missed and that you're getting all the coverages that are afforded to you under that policy for that claim. Another example would be a complex water loss, similar to fire, same thing. Anything that's time consuming or complex, a PA is going to be really useful for that. Another example would be if a homeowner doesn't have the time to handle their claim. They still want to pursue it, but they just don't have the time. Or maybe they don't understand insurance and they'd rather have a professional in the field who knows what insurance is and all of the ins and outs of it. They want to make sure that they're getting the most out of their policy. And so that would be an instance where a PA would be useful. Also, an example would be when they physically can't manage the claim process. So if you're out of state and you have a rental in Texas, but you live in Virginia, then it might make sense. If your property manager is unable to coordinate it, or if you don't have a property manager, then a PA could be very useful because they could be the ones to coordinate providing access to the property and getting all of that documentation together, meeting the contractors, and that way you don't have to come down from out of state to have to deal with that. So in those instances, a PA would totally make sense. But there are instances when a PA doesn't make sense and when they can cost you money. And one example would be is if it's a quick settlement. So if you file the claim and then the insurance company quickly accepts coverage, the adjuster and your contractor quickly come to an agreed scope and the settlement is quickly made. That's not really an instance where a PA would be really beneficial because it's probably something that you could have just handled yourself. And then a small claim would be an example. And I'm using the word small relatively. For example, if you're in Texas and you've got a $15,000 roof claim and you hire a PA and they're charging 10%, that's $1,500 off the top. So that's money that could have gone in your pocket that is now going to the PA. And so you kind of have to figure out, is it really worth it? On the smaller claims or relatively smaller claims, that percentage could be a little bit more impactful. If you're in North Carolina and you've got a standard wind and hail claim and it's the same $15,000 roof, that PA could be charging you 20%. So that's $3,000 that you're missing out on. And that would be an instance where you would just have to be the judge. Is it going to be worth it or not? Is that going to be the factor that decides whether or not I'll be able to make the repairs to my roof? Another time where it may not be wise to get a public adjuster is if you hire the PA before the insurance company has an opportunity to inspect, because you never know. There could be no dispute, there could be no underpayment, there could be no delays. And so if you hire a PA straight out of the gate and it's not an instance where you're out of state or something like that, then you hire a PA straight out the gate and then all of a sudden there's no issues, it's smooth sailing, you get it wrapped up really quickly. You've now paid the PA for negotiations that they didn't even need to do. And so it's really just a matter of ascertaining whether or not a PA is right for your particular situation. Another instance would be if you have an engineer or an attorney and a contractor. Adding another party into the mix it's really only going to complicate things. It makes it very complex, but also that's just more expert fees. So especially if you already have an attorney, because you'll have to pay the attorney fees, the PA fees, they'll both have to be on the check. It'll be a whole thing. So just deciding whether or not that's something that'll work for you. Having a PA doesn't always mean that you're going to come out ahead. And here is a great example. The insurance company offers you $120,000 on your claim. You don't agree, you think that it should be higher, so you enlist a PA, and the PA gets you an extra 10 grand. So now the insurance company has agreed to pay you $130,000. Sounds fantastic. They just saved you $10,000, right? Not quite, because if that PA is charging you 10%, you now owe them $13,000, which leaves you with $117,000. That's $3 grand less than what you already were going to get had you not enlisted the PA. So a lot of times people think if they get a PA, they're automatically going to come out ahead, they'll get more. And there are instances where actually you end up with less after you've paid the PA fees. So be sure to consider that and see what exactly they could be bringing to the table. Evaluate each claim and say, is a PA right for me in this instance? Because some claims it may be yes, but some claims it may not be. And there are a few myths that do surround public adjusters, and one of them is that you always get more money. In the example that I just gave, you ended up getting less money. Also, that they're necessary on every claim. PAs aren't necessary on every claim. If you have your vehicle broken into and some of your belongings are stolen, your contents would be covered under your homeowner's policy. And if you just had a few things stolen, you don't need a PA for that. You just write the few things down, give it to your adjuster, and it's quick. So that's an instance where you wouldn't necessarily need a PA. And the insurance company has to pay their fee. That is a myth that a lot of people think. But actually, the PA is hired by you at will, so the insurance company wouldn't be obligated to pay your PA fee. You would. And then also people think that if they have a signed contract, that means that they're stuck forever with that PA. And that's not the case. So let's expand on that. If you do have a signed contract and you want to know how to cancel, you would need to make sure that you're checking the state rules, because some states do usually have cancellation rights or rescission periods that are often referred to as cooling off periods. And that can be anywhere from 24 hours, 72 hours, 5 business days. It can vary. And so see what your state's cooling off period is in the event that you sign a contract and then decide that you want to cancel really before any work gets going. And then also you want to make sure that you're reviewing the contract. So review the contract's termination clauses, their cancellation clauses, see what their payment obligations are, and make sure that if you do have to cancel a contract, that you're notifying the PA in writing and you keep all documentation, because in some states they still might be entitled to payment based on whatever work they had completed up until that point. And so you want to make sure that you keep very detailed and accurate records of that whole process. And in the event that you do have a dispute with your PA, you want to make sure that you're seeking legal advice to get that dispute resolved. So all in all, public adjusters, they're not good or bad. They're simply a tool that you can use in the claims process. They're very valuable on the right claim, but they can also be very costly on the wrong claim. So understand when they can add value, and that's how you'll know if that's something that you want to do on your particular claim. Say, can this PA add value to my claim? And I want to know, have any of you guys ever hired a PA? If so, share your experience in the comments. If this helped you understand the public adjuster process and roles, then be sure to like and subscribe, and tune in next week where I continue to share some insider tips on how to get the most out of your insurance policy.